first large, very big sculpture I ever made. It's simply called The Bird. And it took me 1.5 years to make it. This was my full occupation during my Fulbright years. And I never could really think about what he was going to look like finally, because the wings finish in unfinished way. In other words, I lived him out as far as I could. And when the bird wouldn't stop, it simply did because I had gotten there inside him, where he was me and I was him or something, and it just finished. But it's the way the things have always grown for me. When I was making that bird, I knew he would take me somewhere. Now, when I first started in sculpture, I used welding as putting bits and pieces together, sticking them together. The most evident material were steel bars, simply. So that the business of welding the bars together and bending them, binding them, was an obvious vocabulary. And I call it a vocabulary because that will come up in other things for me to use. The gargoyle, which you saw in my show. I was, at the time, extremely interested in Romanesque art, and still am, and the gargoyles that reach out from the churches, which were meant to keep away evil things. They're extremely varied in form. Of course, they serve to shed water from the roofs as well, but anyway, that sort of haunted my spirit as that was my gargoyle. Then I discovered there were other little things. This little thing is called le flic, which in French is the popular expression for the policeman. And he's made out of screws and nuts. And so I got interested in little, industrial elements. This is a flower, which was made out of taking apart bicycle chains and industrial chains. The stem is made of a big industrial chain taken apart. Now, I have memories of myself having gone to a junkyard near my studio in Malakoff and having found the variety of chains I wanted and dragging those chains over my shoulder and getting halfway back to the studio. It was a very hot day, and sitting in a cafe and ordering a beer, and the rather surprised look of the lady as she saw me in my overalls with my pile of chains next to me. Now, the French are excessively decent people about not asking any questions, or not appearing to, but I thought to myself, what a beautiful bit of, I just felt wonderful that I could do something as strange as go off and pull these chains back in the junkyard wearing my overalls, not looking like anything that walks down the street generally, but be treated almost as if I were invisible, but having been completely observed, nevertheless. Anyway, I went through a series of pieces. Now, when I got to this one, this is made of bars and sawed off bits of tube. I'd take a tube and just saw it into little pieces, making a stock of them, and then go on and go on and go on and go on. The breasts were made of little things that look like thumbnails in a junk pile. And they're bits that have been cut off with some kind of industrial cutters. They're scraps from preparing tubes to fit on other tubes to make chairs and things like that. Anyway, I would find piles of these chips and pieces. And I went along and worked on things. I think it was at the end of doing this piece that I began to want to be more deliberate in my forms. I took some of those tubes, twisting with a torch, which I learned how to use, and made the flower of the evil that way. Twisting and welding is a technical basis of the creation of these forms. And that's what I was exploring. In my work, I've always been very curious technically. The subject matter and the work itself is something that came from myself and did not ally itself necessarily to any current aesthetic theory. From the time that metal sculptors have started to work, the material they use are the basis of the forms that they create. No sculptor working in plaster or stone would do something of this sort, obviously.